welcome back to Frankly Speaking. I'm your host, Frank. You know, it's interesting, guys. A while back over at the Knights of Christendom, I did a podcast talking about why I chose integralism over, sort of political conservatism in America. As you guys know, as I've explained so many times before, I was on the political right for many, many years, particularly sort of in that right-wing camp, conservatism, that Limbaugh, Hannity kind of a camp where, we're going to spread freedom and democracy all over the world and then live in peace and harmony. And yet the longer I stayed in that movement, the longer my frustration grew, as there was lots of problems within that movement that were never really being addressed. The first of which is the compromises that the right has to give in order to, again, accommodate this giant political tent. Because in a democracy, you always have to compromise in order to, again, win elections. And it's funny because in a democracy, especially from a political right perspective here in America, standards are always being watered down, always, right? There's a few hardcore principles that we may stand for in regards to politics and economics and things like that. But for the most part, conservatives are thrown into a camp of people with different values, different customs, different religious beliefs, different cultures, and different beliefs, all that matter. And you try to kind of mash it all together to get this kind of general ideology to where we can all agree after we've all made a bunch of political accommodations or sacrifices in order to try and fend off the other side, which is pure evil, of course. That's how you look at it, right? You don't want a bunch of Marxists and socialists taking over your country, taking over your economy, and controlling everything you do. So, okay, I may not get everything I want, but it's better than the bad guys winning. But of course, the irony of it all is that in America, the bad guys always win. That's pretty much the bottom line. And it's interesting because in a nation where over the past 30, 40, 50 years, we've seen the middle class get crushed more and more and more. Nobody wants to make this connection. We go back to these utopian beliefs that America is the greatest economy in the history of the world, the economic engine of prosperity, living a life of comfort and luxury like nobody's ever known before. We got these general talking points, right, that we give. And it's a rah kind of pom-pom waving ideology in order to get people out to vote. And ultimately, too, in a nation where true faith and true religion was never defined, you have to give people a reason to come out and vote and to believe in the system itself. And on the political right, these compromises ultimately matter. For me, and I'll just speak for me, I began to see some of these problems early on and mistakes that I made that I'm willing to admit now, particularly in the George W. Bush era, where I've mentioned this before, but in an unofficial capacity, I worked in that campaign. I was putting out posters and signs. I was working things like that. And at the time, back in the 99, 2000 year, right in between there. And I remember coming to the conservative movement because of my pro-life leanings. I thought, listening to talk radio and reading the conservative book writers and things like that. I was reading guys like Thomas Sowell, and I was listening to Limbaugh all the time. Fox News was new. And so the one thing you found out pretty quickly is while there is talking points in regards to conservative media, what actually happens on the ground politically is different. There's two different political worlds on the political right. One that is theory and utopianism. The other one is reality on the ground. And the reality on the ground is what frustrated me because it doesn't parallel or mirror what conservative talking points or what conservative ideology is on talk radio or in books or even in the blogosphere. It's two different worlds. And so when Bush comes into power and all of a sudden now 9/11 happens and we're getting geared up to go to war for democracy all over the world, many of us face the challenge. And this is the challenge that we face. On the one hand, many of us were compelled to support the war because of our conservative leanings. We didn't want a leftist in power because we didn't see that as a choice or as an option at the time, especially for those of us that want some of the social or the moral issues handled by a conservative president, specifically when you got a president that has the House and the Senate, which I believe George W. Bush did for a couple of years, We're all waiting for Roe v. Wade to be overturned, right? We're all waiting for that. We gave the Republicans everything they needed. They talk a good game on abortion, but did that ever come? No, it didn't. What did we get from George W. Bush? I'm asking you this question. What did we get? A war that by the end of his presidency, he wouldn't even defend? Really? A war that, in some respects, looking back now, we're all wondering whether it was a right decision? I don't know. I think a lot of conservatives at the time felt compelled to support the president because, again, we have the fear in this political system that the next guy coming in on the other side of the aisle is worse. He's a socialist. He's a Marxist. He's a communist. And so what do we do here? Of course, we're going to support our president because guess what? The guy on the other side of the aisle or the party on the side of the other side of the aisle is evil. And that's where a lot of conservatives got lost in supporting the George W. Bush regime. And yet, after 8 years of being in his camp or him being president, conservatives got very little from him. Don't give me a bunch of, procedural legislations on the economics and things like that. Don't give me about the Mexico policy. That's nothing. That's always reversed when a Democrat comes into power. The fact is, we never got any substantial legislation at a domestic level, and don't tell me about tax cuts. Okay, everybody loves tax cuts. That's a dirty little secret. It's the only thing Republicans ever passed because guess what? At the end of the day, liberals don't even send their money back to the government. Everybody loves tax cuts, and everybody figures out a way to pass those tax cuts. That's the history of the Republican Party because that's all they ever do and nothing else on what I would call a grand scale domestically. Sure, we get our military endeavors approved. Well, I guess I can't even say approved because sometimes they don't even go to Congress anymore, but fighting wars for democracy. Because remember, the ideology of the right is if we're out there expanding American values along with democracy, of course, democracies never go to war with one another, right? I mean, look at Europe post-World War II. We went in there, we took out those Catholic monarchs, we had to shake them up and bomb them into oblivion, but we instilled democracy there. Has Europe had any world wars ever since America instilled its democracies there? No, we haven't. Hasn't happened. That's part of the ideology. Now, never mind that Europe now is a socialist hellhole right now at this point in time. Never mind that democracy itself has been made a mockery of over there. And a lot of the struggles that European nations have is precisely because democracy oftentimes doesn't work everywhere. You try it, especially in Catholic nations, and those nations have had lots of problems. They've never embraced it fully, never capable of embracing it fully, but we feel good about what we've done, right? We spread American values all over the world. But, for me, the problem came in when we saw these grand compromises from the political right, especially the constitutional thumpers, right? Constitutional thumpers, because I began to see this problem, sort of this confliction between what are true virtues and true values in society, true religious principles that go back for thousands of years, and this thing we call freedom and liberty in America. Because oftentimes those two things come into confliction, and we see that today. Pick your moral issue, right? Pornography, for example, is freedom of speech, according to Glenn Beck, according to Ben Shapiro. Nothing we can do that without violating the American concepts of freedom and liberty. So porn has to reign free, for that matter, in America, right? And really throughout all of the West. And we've seen the damage that it's done. You see a lot of these kind of contradictions. And for that matter, you see very little. It's like my partner Julian said on here the other day, Julian DeMarco, a friend of mine, who came on and said, what are conservatives conserving anymore at this point in time? They're not. All they're doing is capitulating ultimately to the culture and really the fallen nature that has been exploited by liberalism over the past couple hundred years. And this is where the struggles began. And this is where I began to get really frustrated with the political right, and why the more I looked at them, we're like, wait a minute, there's problems here, right? Especially when you have a bunch of dubious characters. Well, no, let me take that back. Not dubious characters, but individuals on the political right that have their own moral issues in the personal realm, and yet they preach the very values that ultimately destroy civilization, that ultimately destroy family, right? And And we're supposed to water it down to such a degree that the only thing that conservatives stand for is some kind of quasi-libertarian-esque economic principles or policies that we're supposed to push, right? So when the economic engine of prosperity in America becomes your God, I have a problem with that. Do I have a problem with people earning a fair wage or earning a living or even owning capital and private property? No, I don't. But that should never come at the expense of true moral principles and the principles of God. And that's exactly what the right has done. They will pay lip service to this indifferent God, right? The God bless America God, the God that we never named, the God that we never defined dogmatically in any kind of a way, right? It's like Glenn Beck says, right? Don't ever let anybody tell you how to believe or what God to believe in. That's your God and that's your private affair. Well, Glenn, that's wrong. Because God is a public figure who has revealed his revelation to the whole world. And God, through that, in that public sentiments, has to be honored publicly. And in order to do that, we have to decide who God is. And since classical liberals never wanted to do that, and again, this goes back to the founding principles, because the founding fathers had contradictory views on God, you wonder why we have all this moral calamity, why we have no cohesion within culture, why we have no basic values anymore that we all can agree on at this point in history. That confusion of the founding fathers, those contradictions of the founding fathers in regards to faith and religion are playing out today in all of our lives. And we're all battling what right from wrong is. And we can't decide what right from wrong is because freedom and liberty oftentimes contradicts what true virtue is, what right and wrong is, and what good and evil is. I mean, look at this situation with satanic temples now being raised in America now. What do we do with that, right? Do we just allow satanic temples to raise and build right next to the Christian churches, right? Right? This is freedom of religion, right? And we walk arm in arm to the polls, Satanists and Christians, and let's go determine the future of America because we're great people, right? I mean, it's a joke. It's a joke. Thousands of years, no other people on the face of the planet would have said, you can allow Satanists just to roam free, open, in public. Nobody would have said that. Everyone would have thought you're a lunatic for saying that. Never mind apostate. Never mind. It's remarkable what we allow in the name of freedom and liberty. And that's not to say that freedom and liberty don't have their place. But I guess in the order and the structure of civilization, if freedom and liberty is your God, you've elevated that to your God, then there is no standard by which we can govern civilization anymore. But if civilization is ordered from true divine revelation, with God at the top, with the 2,000-year analogy of the faith, with ancestral roots, and ultimately, right, dogmatic principles that are time-tested, things that were handed on by like the church, for example, then under those contexts, freedom and liberty have a role. But in and of themselves, freedom and liberty don't mean nothing because we've seen what it's led to, right? It's led to pornography on demand, contraception on demand, abortion on demand, satanic temples being, out and open and in public now. That's freedom and liberty in America, baby. Yeah. You see the problem we face here? And when you present these problems to conservatives, they really have no answers. They don't. Again, I'll go back to Glenn Beck. He's a great example of this. In order for us to have the good freedoms, we have to allow for evil to exist. What kind of answer is that? Tell me, guys, what kind of an answer is that if you think about it? Considering that as human beings, we have a fallen nature. And we've allowed evil to persist now openly for decades in this country. Let's just take the moral debacle of the past 50, 60 years in the West. The sexual revolution. We have allowed evil to exist in the name of freedom, in the name of liberty. How has that worked out? How has it worked out? The family is decimated. The family is in ruination. The family in America has been destroyed. The culture is a flaming pile of manure. And guess what? The political system is as corrupt as can be. And conservatives are telling me it's as corrupt as can be. Conservatives are shaking their head. Well, what happened? I don't understand it. We got bad leadership now. Terrible leadership.
Of course, we have terrible leadership. Rotten culture and broken families lead to what? Bad leadership. Those are the leaders we're raising in the midst of broken cultures and broken families. Why are we shocked? These are the leaders we deserve, right? Because we're an immoral people that decided to put our own humanistic liberties before the liberties of God, the one true triune God and Holy Mother Church. This thing isn't working anymore. And I know I keep repeating myself on this show, but it's kind of funny because, I'm circling the internet, just cruising around to some of the old classical liberal sites I used to go on. So I went on to a hotair.com over there. They have a bunch of guys I used to kind of know back when of the classical liberal camp. They're talking about the same arguments, the same political talking points, right? The same stories, the little detail minutia about what's going on in DC, right? We got this bill passing and this senator's going to fight over here. And then we got this issue over here and we're going to take, and we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And we're going to, and nothing ever happens. Nothing ever happens. Go to a site like that complains about everything that's wrong with America and see if any of those things throughout its history has ever been resolved in America politically. Haven't. None of it's solved. Somebody said to me the other day, I forgot, there was something going on in DC. I'm like, I'm not following. Oh, Frank, you got to follow this stuff because you know what? We all got to stay engaged because in America, we got to fight. We got to fight back to take America. And I'm like thinking to myself, what are you talking about? What the hell are you talking about? I was doing this 20 years ago. And nothing has changed. The country's only going further to the left. I guarantee you, whatever story you're following, whatever political bill is going through Congress, whatever scandal is happening, nothing of a conservative nature is going to win in the end because nothing does. The left always wins. I don't care how many battles in Congress are being fought. The left is going to win because we're a morally disordered society. And we've been, like I said, we've been given the leaders we deserve. In the end, especially when you got a political right movement in America that is absolutely lost, right? There's certain things that bother me because nobody's ever held accountable for the things they've done in the past or said in the past, right? And I'll be the first to tell you where I was in the past, the things I called right, and I called many right, and the things I called wrong. But again, my thinking has changed on a lot of things. But look at the political right now, right? Ever since this last election, they claim that the election was stolen. And they're saying it was a fascistic takeover of the corporations. Okay, let's stop right there. First of all, I don't know if you guys actually know what fascism was in Italy during the reign of Mussolini, but it was structured a little differently than how you guys are presented. That's number one, okay? Not saying fascism is the answer. I'm not promoting fascism any kind of way, just from a standpoint of historical accuracy. There's a little bit more to it, considering Italy was a very agricultural, very artisan nation. There was no Apple, there was no Google in Italy in the 1930s, right? You maybe have Fiat in a handful of other big industries over there, and that's about it. One of the reasons why Italy lost the war is they didn't have the same kind of corporate infrastructure as America. But those are details that we could talk about some other time. Again, not endorsing fascism, but my point is the narrative, right? The political narrative. Now, to deviate from another point that conservatives made for years, and that is supporting corporations, saying how great the corporations were, right? In fact, it wasn't even that long before the 2020 election. I was listening to Hannity in the car, and Hannity, the corporations, they're great. They produce goods and services at an efficient rate. They provide jobs, and they pull out resources that nobody else, that no other little business can do, and they give us a way of life that we as Americans can cherish and comfort, and the kind of comfort that no other human beings in the history of the world have ever lived through, and the corporations could do that and nobody else, right? They've praised the corporations, right? Remember McCain-Feingold? Remember that bill that was being fought by the likes of Limbaugh and other conservatives about political money, right? And the corruption in governments in regards to campaign financing. And it was the right that argued, going against the McCain-Feingold bill. And I'm not a McCain-Feingold fan, don't get me wrong, right? But they're the ones that argued that the corporations putting as much money as they wanted in the political system was an act of freedom and liberty in America. That was the position of the right about what, 10 years ago? I believe 12 years ago, right around there, right? And here we are after the 2020 election. Like, wait a minute, these corporations colluded against us. They stole an election. They shut us down on the internet. They shut down our voices. They shut down our free speech. They control everything. They manipulate the political system. They buy out senators and Congress people. They buy out administrations in Washington, D.C. Maybe these corporations aren't so good. Maybe this is fascism. You guys are the ones that told us that corporations were fantastic. You guys are the ones that defended corporations for all these years, right? Remember what the dividing lines were for many years, right? The Democrats were for the little guys. The Democrats were for the workers. The Republicans were for big business, right? And there's this tug of war between the two, right? That the left wants as high as wages you can get. The right says, no, business got to make money. It's there to make profits. If it doesn't make profits, there's no incentive for a big business to be there. You know, the left says, well, you know, the corporations, they're crushing the little guy. Remember these arguments, right? But where are we at now? You had Glenn Beck, or the likes of Glenn Beck. I bring up Beck because he has some serious contradictions in the, 20, 30 years he's been on radio. I don't know how long it's been now. But you had Beck for a long time who preached the notion that here comes Marxism, here comes communism, here comes progressivism. They're going to take over America. We got to fight. We got to go to polls and defeat these far left progressives. And then all of a sudden, after 30 years of enamoring his audience based upon the notions of fighting this left and right war, this, you know, and how we have to fight the left, defeat the left, after this last election, after years and years and years and years of the likes of Beck promoting corporations as the greatest thing since sliced bread, then he turns around and says, well, wait a minute now, whoa, we got problems. The corporation screwed us. This isn't leftism anymore. This isn't communism. This isn't Marxism. This is fascism. Okay, Glenn. For 30 years, you made a nice, comfortable living, endorsing your gold, endorsing all your products that you do, right? Making a good living, saying that communism and leftism and Marxism was the problem. So you were wrong for 30 years? You figured out 30 years after the fact? Is that what you're telling me? Because if that's your track record, and it takes you 30 years to see the grand scheme of things, then I'm worried about what you're telling me now, right? Maybe in another 30 years, you'll see that it wasn't fascism. Maybe it was something else, I hope, right, Glenn? So this is where we're at. And if you look at the history of the political right, and don't get me wrong, everybody says, oh, you're picking on the right. Listen, the left is demonic. I'll be the first to tell you, right? But the battle is not there. The battle is not on the left, to be honest. The battle is on the right. Because the right claims to stand for conservative values. It claims to stand for tradition. It claims to stand for religion and God and all these things that are good code words to bring in people that are, again, more grounded in faith and more grounded in family. It's a lot of code speak, but at the end of the day, it's nonsense. It's nonsense at the end of the day, because they never actually give you any details other than the economic engine of prosperity, which is another mixed message, to be honest with you, right? While prosperity and certain comforts, certain leisures can be a good thing, but when you only focus on those as the greatest achievement of a society, those two can become disordered. This is why we got a bunch of people walking around as automatrons now, right? Not to mention that economic, prosperity has come with the slave wage class labor in China all these years. That's a little bit of a problem too. I'm not against comfort. I'm not against leisure. I'm not against prosperity in a society. But I do have a problem when money and economics and these great comforts we all talk about become your God. I do have a problem with that. And to the right, economics has become a religion, right? You know, it's funny because they will tell you that, again, they believe in these abstract principles of God. But at the end of the day, listen to talk radio. Listen to talk radio, right? And let them explain to you why America is a great nation, right? And unlike Catholics and integralists who will say God comes first, right? The Gospels come first. The social kingship of Christ comes first. The sacraments come first. The thing that comes up the most, and this is years of listening to Limbaugh, was how we have the economic engine of prosperity. We have a way of life that no other people in the history of the planet have ever lived. The comforts, the pleasures, the leisures, right? It all comes down to sort of these humanistic principles of economic prosperity. It comes down to making the money. That's what Americans do best. And to a certain degree, I would agree with that. But in the process of this great economic prosperity, we've sold our souls. We've sold our souls. Look at the state of the culture. Look at the state of the family, because we've never stood by any true principles of faith and religion. I keep saying that. Right? If you're going to take credit on the right for being the greatest economic, system in the history of the world, comforts, pleasures, technologies, medicine, all that stuff, fine. You want to take credit? Fine. But you also got to take the blame for the collapse of the family, the collapse of the culture, and the moral disarray that we now are living through. And you got to take the blame for the fact that, guess what? Your progressive siblings now are controlling your lives, and we're morphing into this far left kind of nation. Why does that happen? Oh, because of bad leadership? That's what I hear. But bad leadership is based upon bad principles of morality, lack of faith, true faith in a society. And you will see all these contradictions on the right. You will see them all. And you will see the compromises, right? Especially when issues of disorder in civilization come up. And as these issues come up, they will tell you, well, Frank, we've lost the social war. We've lost the cultural war. It's time for us to move on. And of course, my rebuttal to that is, yeah, but wait a minute. If you have disorder at the cultural level, if you have disorder at the familial level, how does that not translate into disorder at the political and economic level? And that's what we've seen. You want to talk about economic engine of prosperity, right? Fine. What about the disorder of a government, of a nation that runs massive debt, that leaves future generations in debt perpetually? Sure, we're all having a rocking good time, but in the hourglass of history, how will history judge us in 50 years, 75 years, 100 years, 200 years? Are they going to be looking at us with this idea of the economic engine of prosperity? Are they going to be looking back and say, America went broke? America went broke because it overspent. And there's great comforts and leisures and the technology we're all kind of boasting right now was all temporary. You sold the farm in order to have those things, right? Again, this moment in time that we're living through is one tiny sand in the hourglass of history. How will history judge us by future generations? Are they going to judge us as the greatest culture and nation in history of the world? I don't think so. I don't think so. We may tell ourselves that now because we don't believe in true principles of religion. So we have to come up with a mythos, a national mythos of sorts, a national myth, I guess, in order to keep us engaged in the political system, or give us something to cheer about, give us something to sacrifice everything for, right? Especially, in this usury system where everybody's working from birth to death in order to manage, again, this debt system that we're all born into, right? You have to give people a reason to participate in the system. So we create this national myth. And that's not to say that Americans are bad people. I've always said it. That Americans are actually good and decent people. They're hardworking people. But there's some foundational issues that start at the government. And I'm not talking about this left and right dichotomy about government. I'm talking about at the origins and the foundations of how government, our government, the American government, never gave God its proper place at the head of the table. Because any nation that doesn't put the one true triune God and ultimately the church in its place of authority and power. And I know that word authority is troublesome for you guys on the political right, but this is the structure of human civilization. We've always had a basic, understanding of, you got the governed and you got the governed. That's how human civilization always works, right? This idea of these autonomous individuals just running around everywhere. But we're seeing how that works out now, right? We're seeing how that works out. The autonomous individual is destroying everything in its path because the autonomous individual doesn't have to respect or pay its due diligence of sorts to true principles of virtue, right? We're not autonomous individuals. We're born into hierarchical structures, starting with the family. And as the family breaks down, guess what happens? Society breaks down. You cannot have a healthy society without a healthy family. And you cannot have a healthy family without the Church of God, which is the grander family, so to speak, right? Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Our Lady given to us as our mother at the foot of the cross, the saints being our brothers and sisters, the church being a family is what we are. See, the problem with individualism, again, is that it leads to narcissism, nihilism, and everything that's essentially selfish, right? Not that as individuals, we don't have a right to certain dictates, right? But in general, the entire concept, when we move away from the familial system, well, there's no need for families. And if there's no need for families, families break down. And that is really the center of your civilization. And that's what we've seen over the past, 40, 50, 60 years. Is the family break down, especially as these comforts and leisures make life a little bit easier for all of us. So these are some of the contradictions I saw on the political right, and they're never really ever solved, other than really politics becoming a fantasy sports in many ways, right? We got our team and we want to win and we want to celebrate and get our trophy and kind of point a finger at the other side. We beat you. We beat you. That's what politics has become. Because at the end of the day, politics only goes in one direction, and that is to the complete moral degradation of society. And there's going to come a day and point in age where there's many on the conservative side, they're not going to even be able to claim that America was an economic powerhouse. That's going to come to an end soon. Just birth rates, demographic rates alone are going to assure us either we're going to collapse or we're going to ship in a bunch of immigrants who don't share our values. And that's what's happening, right? So a lot of this stuff is relative, depending on interpretation, how we want to look at things, right? Because for many years, Catholics said, listen, contraception is bad. Contraception is bad. It's going to bring disorder to society. Protestants and classical liberals said, no, that's freedom and liberty. Look where we're at. I mean, the demographic issues of America is not even replacing each other. It's just one of the issues, right? We're not even replacing ourselves. We're a dying breed. Americans are a dying breed. And as a result, we're bringing in immigrants from all over the world who don't share our values, that are watering down our values. And America is fundamentally changing. It's like the conversation I was having with a friend of mine a while back. I said, look at all these, these republics, these republics. Look at all these republics post-Enlightenment, right? Tell me which one of them hasn't turned to some kind of quasi-Marxist state at some point. Look at them. Look at the West. Italy, Spain, Germany, America. We've all gone to the far left, right? And I think the embracement of Enlightenment principles, it's coming to full fruition. So I don't know anymore. I got conservative friends of mine telling me we got to fight, we got to fight, we got to fight. I don't know what that means, because I fought with you guys for many, many years. I battled with you guys for many, many years. I got lots of battle scars, man, over the years, up here and right here in my heart, fighting with you guys. And nothing ever came of it. Nothing. Because even when conservatives win, they actually lose, right? Even when they have the House, the Senate, the presidency. Remember that historic election a couple of years ago? Remember when Republicans swept historic amounts of, state legislatures, including the House and the Senate, with Donald Trump in power? What came of that? What came of that? Okay, we got a few economic policies with Trump. He was good at that, but we didn't revolutionize culture and society in any kind of way. There's nothing that was long lasting in that respect, was there? We got nothing. We never get nothing, even when we have supposed, men of the right in power. Conservatives really need to take a look at themselves in the mirror and understand what they stand for. I think a lot of the problems are the fact that Protestantism, along with Masonry, have made things complex throughout America's history. Protestantism, well, do I want to get into this because this is a bigger conversation, without a doubt. Protestantism prevents America from ever understanding and knowing God in its truest sense. And that's not to say that Protestants are not good people, but there is a leadership class out there within Protestantism that has every vested interest into keeping the divisions of Protestantism alive and well because they make a good living off of it. And the doctrinal confusion of Protestantism ultimately leads to the breakdown of culture in America and the breakdown of family, right? This is why, as Americans, we have no common values. And so when the political right starts talking about an amicable divorce, that's the fruits of Protestantism, because they've never had any unity. In America being fundamentally a Protestant nation from its origin, again, mixed in with Freemasonic values, this is what Protestantism always leads to, right? Is the dissolution or of nations and cultures and families eventually. Remember, Catholic nations were essentially, most of them, taken down by force in one capacity or another, right? In France, it was the guillotine. In Italy, it was, Garibaldi marching up the Italian boot with this 1,000 red shirts, town by town, beating people up, right? In Spain, it was a little different. Franco fought as best he could over there and then handed over to the monarchy, but the monarchy in a time of revolutionary sort of post-Enlightenment society felt an insecurity and surrendered their power over there, right? That's what happens because Catholic cultures don't dissolve on their own because they're true principles and graces that you get from God, ultimately, God's blessings, especially those nations that tie themselves to the church. There's a great track record of Catholic nations and the vibrant culture and the strong familial bonds that they created and the good life. Catholic nations set up the West for what it became, right? And they did this after having to, again, civilize a bunch of pagan horde nations throughout its history. The classical liberals took from the Catholic Church, or Christendom in general, I should say, a world that was very healthy. And they've done nothing but bring it to its knees in a very short time. What Christendom built for 1,400 years, post-Enlightenment civilization has destroyed. And, we're 250 years into this thing, roughly. I would say it was already dead by the 1900s. It was dead already. It's just a matter of where you want to declare what time and day the republics in the West died in post-Enlightenment society. So there you have it. I really don't know at this point where we go as a nation and as a culture, because I'm in middle of America and people are truly frustrated where I'm at. And these are good patriotic people. And I'm not against patriotism. I love America. It's a beautiful country. I love its people for the most part. There's parts of it that are kooky liberal, don't get me wrong. That's the parts I don't like, but but I think Americans are good and decent people. They work hard. I do believe that many of them are caught up in their disorders, but that's a byproduct of culture, right? That's a byproduct of the lack of faith and true public devotion that America failed to give to God, right? This privatized religious thing. It's only a matter of time that, well, faith and religion and family and culture all breaks down. And that's what's happened. But there's a spirit that Americans have of working hard, and that's a good thing. I think when Americans sometimes work too hard, when they accept the usury system, and this is the thing, right? When I was in the classical liberal camp, one of the things that the right always pushes is how you got to work. You have to work. And if you work hard in America, you can do anything you want. Okay, fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I come from a fine line of men, ancestral roots, where we all worked hard. I consider myself a hard worker in certain ways. And now I got a disability that prevents me physically, but I still work hard at what I do. Things like this podcast, things like raising my family. I work hard. I don't think, I don't look at life with, rosy colored glasses. Our Lord said, you don't work, you don't eat. But when work becomes your idol, you have a problem. There's that story, I've said this a few times, there's that story that many conservatives like to boast about, how you got that one man or that one individual who works at a company for 40 or 50 years, and he dedicated his whole life. He worked hard and he worked himself up the totem pole to achieve his promotions and get his money. And he worked hard his whole life, because as Americans, we work hard. This is what we do, right? We push this, right? This is a whole part of the economic engine of prosperity. And this is how we make the money in America, right? And it's a story of pride. It's a story of hard work. It's a story that defines America. But then, of course, the end of the story is, once this gentleman who's worked so hard and achieved all this success, he retires, he's got nothing else left in his life, and he dies, because his work was his whole life. And that's supposed to be a great story of American virtue and American values. You guys buying that? I think that's one of the most pathetic stories, one of the most pathetic analogies you could ever give. In a system where we've all been taken off the land, where we own essentially nothing, we're born into proverbial death. This whole employee-based economic system, which I'm not necessarily against an employer-employee-based economic system, but I'm also in favor of people being able, in a reasonable way, to own their own land and own those tools of their trade. That's been robbed of Americans for a long time now. And when the only thing you're taught in society, again, because we never established public devotion to the one true God, is we identify ourselves through our work and through the economic engine of prosperity, we create soulless individuals. We create soulless cultures. And it's the reason why families ultimately die. Not that work, hard work, is a bad thing, but when it becomes your idol and your only thing, right? When you do it too much. See, the old world understood that there has to be a balance between the natural and supernatural. In the old world, from my understanding, you got so many days of the year off, particularly the feast days of the church, the major feast days of the church, because the church understood that if work becomes your idol, then it replaces God. And that's what we've done in America. Work and making money and the economic engine of prosperity has replaced devotion to the one true God. And with that, like I said, we've created a soulless culture. Catholic civilization understood there has to be a balance, right? For me, somebody like me, I would never want to be known for achieving the economic engine of prosperity in an employer-employee-based society, or situation, I should say. I identify myself through my familial lines. The most important thing to me in my life is my family, my wife, my children, and my extended family, cousins, aunts, and uncles. It's not my job. It's not the economic engine of prosperity. It's not this fairy tale story of working hard and then dying in some kind of modernistic sort of sainthood that we've created, this false notion of sainthood that we've created in America. But in an economic system where both the man and the woman has been forced out into the labor force in order to support the usury system, the debt system we're all born into, right? There's no time for God anymore. There's no time for true devotion anymore. There's no time for family anymore in many respects, right? This is why when both parents are out of the home and kids are being home and they got their cell phones and you got MTV and the porn industry and, Glamour magazine raising your kids, you wonder why the children of our time are so disordered and why they have so many problems, right? Because one, you've killed the faith. Well, one, you haven't acknowledged true faith, right? No public devotion to God. And then you force everybody out into the workforce in this usury system to where families are all split apart. I mean, even the notion of men and women, husband and wife being split apart into sort of two separate jobs, for example, is a problem in my opinion. Men and women, husband and wife should be working together in a familial concept of sorts. You wonder why we have all these cases of infidelities? Yeah, listen, the husband is working 40 hours a week, the wife is working 40 hours a week, there's stress, there's a lack of connection, right? Because there's no true faith, no true religion anymore, right? And guess what? Um, you know, you got husbands working with other women, you got wives working with other men. It's a terrible scenario where in the old world, husbands and wives, they worked together. They took care of the home, whether it was the farm or the fishing industry, right? There was an understanding, this complementary nature between men and women and husband and wife that worked together. And those occasions of sins didn't exist, not to this level that we see now. And as we move forward as a society, as inflation creeps in, you're going to continue to see men and women be divided. And this is why divorce has taken it's been such a problem in modernity, right? You didn't see these kind of divorce rates in the old world. Again, the old world, healthy families, healthy cultures, vibrant cultures, rich cultures, right? We live in America in this mass-produced society. Everything's mass-produced from China for the most part, right? We go to Walmart, we buy our Chinese goods at a cheap price, right? It all participates in the economic prosperity, yet our culture is very sterile, it's very dry. I mean, you look at the cultures of the past. I know my Italian culture is just beautiful. You go there to this day, the churches, the art, the frescoes, the architecture structures of buildings. Our ancestors built beautiful things, beautiful things. Life was slower. Things had more meaning, and they expressed the beauty of life in the arts and the work that they did. But in this world, there's really nothing beautiful about it other than, you know what, we all got to go out there and make the money and support the usury system. That's what it's become. And it's frustrating because conservatives don't see this. Conservatives have always been blind to this fact. Now, many conservatives will tell you that they respect tradition, right? They will tell you there's importance when it comes to tradition and going back, and this is why they don't like sort of the progressive nature of the political left in America, and how the left is always trying to move against civilization to sort of these awkward and kind of immoral notions. But the traditions that the conservatives actually pick are traditions that, well, I don't know. I don't know if they're traditions at all, to be honest with you, because they're traditions of the Enlightenment and rebellion to the core. So we'll see what happens. I just think, we're living in a day and age where there's a lot of confusion and there's no answers. And the next political fight or the next legislative bill or the next Supreme Court justice or the next election, I went through this for decades. I went through it 2 decades. We all had all these grand hopes and aspirations that we're going to take back America, because that was one of the back when I was podcasting 20 years ago, 15 years ago, that was one of the great sayings on the right. We got to take back America, right? And it meant, of course, getting to the polls and voting. And now that there's some electoral integrity issues here that many on the right claim, what does the definition, and we got to go out there and fight, because I keep hearing that we got to fight, we got to fight, we got to fight. Okay, what does that mean? What does that mean? Because I fought with you guys for a long time, and not only guys, you guys not ever win, but you guys have no idea where you're going, and your principles are contradictory. There's more to life than economics. There's more to life in the economic engine of prosperity. Unless as Americans we find true moral principles of faith, find the faith of our ancestors and the principles of the one true triune God, this thing is lost, ladies and gentlemen. There's no saving America. I really don't know how to say it anymore. I've said it so many times on this cast and overnights of Christendom, but it's something, but I'll probably continue to repeat. I take no joy in it. I take no pride in it. Say that my country I was born and raised in, the country I'm going to die in, the country I raised a family in, country I'm going to leave kids in here to figure it out after I'm long gone from this world. I take no pleasure in saying that America is a dying nation. None. I don't want to. I have everything at stake here. But I can't help but look in the mirror and be honest with myself first and foremost. And that's what I'm asking my conservative friends to do. When do we stand for something real? I mean, you want to worship at the altar of a written document like the Constitution, that's fine.
There may be some principles there that I agree with, but it's not Holy Writ. It's not the Word of God. It doesn't deal with the fallen nature of man and the struggles of sin. It's a political document for a country in its most basic sense to operate itself, which is fine, which is fine. When do we find God in America? I don't know, because I believe that's the biggest problem we have. If you believe that politics is the solution to solve all our problems, well, that's a mistake I used to make, a mistake I won't make again. Because politics is not going to solve the problems that we're facing as a nation. It's not. Look around you. I see a nation in many respects that's demonically possessed. And I wonder sometimes if America needs a massive, massive exorcism. And I think the one thing that's clear when you look at our friends on the left, there's some serious disorders there, serious disorders. And I believe some of those disorders are of a supernatural level. Now, if you're a Catholic, I think we understand what that is. If you're a classical liberal, can you even acknowledge that? Because you never acknowledged God publicly. You haven't. You cannot cast out the demon until you publicly acknowledge God. And conservatives have never done that. In fact, they've ran away from the concept of publicly acknowledging God. Because guess what? As I said so many times before, conservatives love their sins just as much as their leftist siblings. They may not go as kooky and as far possessed as the left, but they like their sins too. And that's the dirty little secret about politics in America and why this thing is not going to be won at a political battle. It has to be won with true devotion and true faith to God. And the first thing that conservatives have to do, if they're serious, they need to give public devotion to God Almighty first and foremost. There you go, ladies and gentlemen. This is Frank signing off for Frankly Speaking. Good night, everybody.